Hello, I'm the guy who's been spitting in your Uber Eats orders just before the driver picks them up. Spyro, it's a series that I love. I think. These days I'm not so sure. I do own the whole series, most of which I bought with my own money, so I do feel that I should say that I love it, at the very least in an attempt to trick myself into believing it was all worth it. The thing is, I love the original trilogy and I love the Reignited trilogy, but there's a lot sandwiched between them that just sucks. Spyro's highest highs are pretty high, but his lowest lows are really fucking low. And unfortunately, there are a lot more lows than highs. So on average, the Spyro series isn't actually all that great. I know it's not what you want to hear, but look at the facts. This is just the world we live in. Politicians control the weather, birds are cannibals, and Spyro has had a tough life. I think it would be wrong to try and rewrite history, so I'm here to put this dragon's existence under a magnifying glass and look at the top 10 worst Spyro levels. Of all the things this series has shat out, these 10 levels are the first turds I would flush down the proverbial crapper. Brace yourselves for an onslaught of terrible Spyro levels. This is gonna be rough. Even though I was just talking about how I love the original trilogy, our number 10 spot is actually occupied by Gnasty's loot. Gnasty's loot is the big finale of the first game, but it doesn't fucking deserve to be. This level becomes available after you've done everything else in the game. You've rescued all the dragons and dragon eggs, and you come here to reclaim the last of the stolen treasure. You would think it'd be like any other level from the game, but that's where you're wrong. This is a very unconventional level. Firstly, the way it looks. It's pretty ugly. It has a rather gross combination of colours, with the industrial greys and yellows of the buildings that clash with the bright orange lava and the bright green water below. It's not a good combo, it's a pineapple on pizza sort of travesty. The way you navigate the level is unique, but the logic of it is stupid. You're allowed to free fly like in speedways, but you are only allowed to fly at a maximum altitude of whatever altitude Spyro has walked on. You can't fly above a certain altitude unless Spyro has climbed above that altitude on foot, which doesn't make any sense. Imagine pilots having to do that with aeroplanes. Attention passengers, this is Captain Milky Nipple speaking. We do plan to take off, but before we're able to get off the ground, we're going to need to drive the plane up to the top of Mount Everest before the laws of physics will actually allow us to get this thing in the air. We thank you for your patience. You see how that doesn't make sense? What's even stupider is that Gnasty's loot is intentionally built around this mechanic. This wasn't an accident, they did this on purpose, which I think is even more baffling than the very nature of the mechanic itself. The only conventional part of this level is the fact that it's focused on collecting gems, but it goes about it in a really boring way. There are no enemies, so you're not in danger at any point. All you're doing is aimlessly flying around in what looks like a repurposed test level, looking for chests you haven't opened yet and staircases you haven't climbed yet. It's basically a speedway, but without the time pressure or the objective. Sure, there are thieves you can chase, and the final room full of 25s is a cool and satisfying finish, but the level as a whole is a real wet fart of a finale to the game. Gnasty's loot sucks, and no amount of treasure will ever make up for that lost time. Following up at number 9 is Cloud 9. I've got to be honest, putting Cloud 9 at the number 9 spot put me on Cloud 9. Was that one of the main reasons I chose it for the number 9 spot? Maybe, but there are other reasons as well. Cloud 9 is one of the many disasters you explore in Spyro Enter the Dragonfly. Now to be fair, I could really put any level from Enter the Dragonfly here because they all suffer from very similar problems. They say that size matters. They say that bigger is better. But once you find yourself on the receiving end of a throbbing 12-inch cock, you might not be so sure. Enter the Dragonfly's levels are enormous, they're big, and all the items of interest are really spread out. Large, flat, open plains are connected by wide, empty hallways, and like a throbbing 12-inch cock, they're a real pain in the arse. In the context of Spyro, bigger does not mean better. Bigger means painstakingly running around these levels, combing over every pixel of empty space to pick up gems and annoying dragonflies that refuse to get caught in your bubble breath. If Enter the Dragonfly's levels were compacted down to the size of an original trilogy level, it wouldn't nearly be so bad. It would at least be over more quickly. Combining that with the game's myriad of technical issues makes every level in the game a slog. The reason Cloud 9 is being isolated for the sake of this list is because of all the levels in the game, Cloud 9 is the most tedious to navigate. It's more vertically involved than the others, requiring more gliding and backtracking through previous areas at a higher elevation than the others. Normally that's something I would praise in a Spyro level, but here it only serves to amplify the size issue. On top of that, it just doesn't look very nice. I think the theme is okay as an idea, but the level doesn't really do it justice. The architecture looks pretty bland, and the thick marshmallow clouds are pretty hideous, and they obscure the hourglass, which should be the main feature of the level. It just doesn't look like anything special, it's like a knockoff Cloud Spires, and that's a generous compliment. It has a speedway, which is fine I guess, doesn't do the idea of a speedway justice either, but it's passable. Far more passable than the Puffy Palace defense mission, which is just dog shit. Cloud 9 doesn't really have anything good going for it. Even though every level in Enter the Dragonfly is pretty much equally bad, Cloud 9 is just that little bit worse. Next up, at number 8, we have Dark Mine. Dark Mine is one of the final levels in Spyro Hero's Tale, which is actually one of the better games from Spyro's flop era. It's actually a pretty competent interactive experience. If you focus solely on Spyro's gameplay, A Hero's Tale doesn't actually have any levels that are outright bad. They're all pretty okay. But unfortunately, some levels feature the reincarnation of Satan himself, Blink. The Spyro series has had a lot of additional playable characters across its lifetime, but Blink is without a doubt the worst of the bunch. His levels are incredibly slow and unbelievably boring. Blink segments make watching paint dry seem as exciting as a riot on the streets of Paris. You plod around a dull underground environment looking for crystals to blow up with bombs. Detonating little dark crystals with bombs does sound exciting, but when you realize that that is broken up by long stretches of incredibly slow and dull platforming, it makes you question why the development team sank their budget into making Blink's levels in the first place. Now, you're probably wondering why Dark Mine is taking the brunt of my scathing attack on Blink. Well, firstly, it's the only Blink segment that I actually couldn't bring myself to finish because I was so drained and exhausted. It was like my will to live had been sucked out of me. I just couldn't take it anymore. I was ready to dig my own grave and fall into it. Secondly, it's also because of the levels that contain Blink's bullshit, Dark Mine is the weakest. When it comes to Spyro's section, it isn't anything special. It's really short, it contains more of the same gameplay you see in pretty much every other level, and the theme is very similar to the levels that come before and after it. That 3-level stretch is all very industrial and mine-focused, so Dark Mine doesn't really have anything to help it stand out. I mean, it has Blink, and that's enough for me to want to rip the level a second arsehole, but it doesn't have anything to help it stand out in a good way. It's forgettable, and as such, Dark Mine ends up in the number 8 spot. Number 7 is taking us to the Game Boy Advance with Time Machine Lab from Spyro Season of Ice. Time Machine Lab is one of the many near-identical levels you explore in Season of Ice. In Season of Ice, every level is essentially exactly the same. They all have the same objectives, and in terms of structure, they're all very similarly designed. Or at least, I think they are. The lack of a map or any way of being able to tell where you are in the greater context of the featureless, repetitive, barren levels makes it very hard to tell. Time Machine Lab is no exception to this. It suffers from those same problems. What makes Time Machine Lab worse than its fellow Season of Ice levels is... well, there are two things. I know it's immature to be going after appearance yet again, but this is yet another hideous level. It looks awful. It looks like someone grabbed a heap of receipts and dumped them on top of a chessboard, and combining that with the lavender Lego bricks and the dark green circuitry in the background makes the whole level an eyesore. The other thing that hurts Time Machine Lab is the fact that it strangely has even less direction than the other levels in Season of Ice. It's weirdly much more open, making it even harder to tell where you have and haven't been, and making it a lot easier to get lost. You end up wandering in circles, dying because the awful depth perception of the game fucked you over, and having to start over from the very beginning to repeat the process ad nauseum. Time Machine Lab can't even redeem itself with its objectives because every level in Season of Ice has the same objectives, so this level is left in a situation where it's the same as every other level, only much worse because of its poor layout. Maybe the developers should use the Time Machine Lab to go back in time to before they committed this terrible crime of creating this awful level. Let's get 6y with number 6, whose position has been filled by Fairy Library. Fairy Library is the first proper level you play through in Spyro Adventure. Spyro Adventure is a game I have a lot of problems with. It's a game that put a spin on the Spyro formula, and I can appreciate the effort to try something new, but I do not appreciate the game it resulted in. Spyro Adventure and all of its levels are tangled up in a convoluted web of fetch quests, items, keys, and backtracking that make the process of completing the game slow and tedious. You complete objectives in levels that reward you with items related to quests in completely unrelated levels. You encounter coloured chests you can only unlock with keys earned by Sergeant Bird's and Agent 9's bullshit side missions that are also in completely unrelated levels. Oh, sorry, that's misleading. For each Sergeant Bird and Agent 9 mission, you only earn half a key. My mistake. If you wanted to fully complete this game, you would need to trek back and forth across the Dragon Realms over and over and over to slowly chip away at the fetch quests and the ridiculous amount of items and the stupid half keys and the backtracking it all requires. Spyro Adventure is the Banjo-Tooie of Spyro games, and that's not a compliment. It's a very flawed game, and it wasn't fun or satisfying to play through. I'm attacking the whole game here, so you're probably wondering what Fairy Library specifically did to warrant ending up on this list. The simple truth is, it betrayed my trust. I didn't know anything about Spyro Adventure when I started playing it the first time. I thought it was going to follow the same formula as Seasons of Ice and Flame. I didn't think it was going to turn the formula on its head and butcher it into something horrific. Fairy Library took advantage of my ignorance and cut off my balls before I had the chance to figure out what was going on. Fairy Library was the beginning of my descent into madness in Spyro Adventure, and I will never forgive it for stabbing me in the back. And besides, it's not like the level itself is anything special, it's just more of the same GBA Spyro structure we've seen before. Its only unique feature is those little bug things that carry you around. That's not enough to make up for what this level did to me. I trusted you, Fairy Library! I trusted you! For number 5, we're heading back to the original trilogy with Super Bonus Round. Super Bonus Round is to Year of the Dragon what Gnasty's loot is to the first game, and following in those footsteps, Super Bonus Round is rubbish. I just don't understand the thought process behind it. This level is supposed to be the grand finale, the level that brings the original Spyro trilogy to a close. Why the fuck did they decide to end it like this? Super Bonus Round has nothing to do with what Spyro is all about. It's just a lackluster treasure hunt that features all of the worst parts of Year of the Dragon. It sees the return of a handful of shitty vehicles, the ones that you already had to suffer through to even be allowed entry to this bastard level. The skateboard, the submarine, this flying saucer thing, it really is Year of the Dragon syndrome distilled into a single level. I'll also never forget the jarring fight against the sorceress where she is completely silent the whole way through. She dies without uttering a sound. It's so eerie. I will never be able to wrap my head around why they decided to end off the trilogy with this. These vehicles weren't fun the first time around. Why bring them back? It's such a flat finish to the game. And it's not like the theme of it is cool, it's just a bunch of snow-covered mountains. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Why would the sorceress store treasure here? Why not let us explore an actual vault? Or at the very least, put that throne room from the cutscenes to good use. Super Bonus Round just raises so many questions. Mainly just, why did you do this, to every single decision it made. In a very similar boat to Super Bonus Round, the number 4 spot belongs to Dragon Shores. Dragon Shores is Gateway to Glimmer's equivalent of Gnasty's loot and Super Bonus Round, and it's astonishing that the developers didn't get the celebratory final level thing right a single time. Oh shit, I just punched my water bottle. The thing about Dragon Shores is that it has even less to offer than the other two. At least Gnasty's loot and Super Bonus Round let you collect gems and, you know, do stuff. Dragon Shores is just a collection of very basic minigames that offer no interesting gameplay at all. 2 of them are about shooting targets, one of them is a much easier and much more boring version of the trolley mission from Breeze Harbor, and one of them is a boat ride where you not only don't get to do anything, but you don't even get to watch Spyro not getting to do anything. Doing all of this rewards you with tokens, which you can use to gain access to the theater. which sounds cool. It sounds like you'll be able to watch some sort of bonus cutscene, or maybe some sort of behind-the-scenes mini-documentary from the developers. Maybe you'll get to look at concept art, or some trailers for the next game or something. But no, it just lets you watch the cutscenes from the game. You know, the cutscenes you watched as you were completing the game to get to this very moment. Yeah, you've seen them all before. All that carnival game bullshit was essentially for nothing at all. Super Bonus Round wasn't great, but at least it had gameplay. Dragon Shores is such a letdown. I don't know why Spyro was so keen to come here. It's not like the beach is particularly big either. It's a real shame. The one thing Dragon Shores has going for it is the fact that it does grant Spyro permanent Super Flame to use in a new save file. But that's pretty much it. Dragon Shores, more like Dragon Bores. Whoop! That's my joke. We now begin our descent into the true depths of hell, and I mean that literally with number 3, Burned Lands. Burned Lands is one of the final levels in Dawn of the Dragon, and I have a feeling it's going to be really tough to talk about because there isn't really a whole lot to say about it. I think it just typifies the Legend of Spyro experience, and anyone who has played the Legend of Spyro will know exactly what I mean by that. Burned Lands is a very repetitive and boring level. I think it looks alright, the gushing, sweltering lava is pretty neat, and the desolate, scorched land complements it well, but because that's all there is in this environment, the whole level looks the same. It lacks any notable features or landmarks, and I found it incredibly easy to get lost in. I had no idea where to go, because every direction had the same scorched land and lava. Every corner of the level looks identical. It's kind of like Season of Ice in that way. It's one of the levels where you get to make extensive use of free-flying, but there's no point. There's no reason to explore because everything looks the same, and the only thing you'll ever find is more enemies. As for what you actually get to do, it's just lots and lots and lots of combat roadblocks, being stopped to fight a bunch of enemies with no chill, and barely any gem resources to help you out, over and over again. You see what I mean? It typifies the Legend of Spyro experience. It's very repetitive and ultimately very boring because of that. It becomes even more repetitive when the tougher enemies kick your ass over and over again. I vividly remember playing this level when I was reviewing Dawn of the Dragon. I was so sick of the game at that point that I could barely bring myself to keep playing. My controller died during this level, as did my spirit, and I genuinely considered quitting at this point. But despite the fact that I was not having a good time, I persisted and beat the level. And it was not worth it. Burned Lands is a very bleak and underwhelming level, rife with repetitive gameplay and not rife with interesting scenery. It looks like hell for good reason. It is. Our number 2 spot also comes from The Legend of Spyro, and that's Pirate Fleet. Pirate Fleet is in many ways Eternal Night's equivalent of Burned Lands, in that it showcases the worst of what The Legend of Spyro has to offer. The big difference here is that it's longer and worse. Much like Burned Lands and The Legend of Spyro as a whole, Pirate Fleet is a long, drawn-out gauntlet of continuous combat encounters against the same enemies over and over again, broken up by rides on small boats that take you to big boats, in which you have to endure more combat encounters against the same enemies over and over again. It does have a cool theme. I like the idea of an airborne fleet of pirate ships, but the context of there being pirates to start with doesn't have anything to do with the greater story of Eternal Night. Airborne ships are cool, but the novelty wore off pretty quickly, and it isn't anywhere near enough to redeem this absolute slog of a level. It's levels like Pirate Fleet that really make me question what the developers were thinking when they made this level, and other levels like it. Surely they must have play-tested the game, right? What were they thinking when they were making it? Yeah, we just had 6 identical combat encounters. It went alright, but I reckon the level would benefit from another 14 identical combat encounters. Like, what are you doing? Did they really think players would like this? Pirate Fleet does have 2 boss fights against the parrot things and the brain-dead pirate captain, but it was nowhere near worth the effort of making it through the pain to get there. After the first 30 minutes of mindless combat and jumping from ship to ship, you just sort of start wishing the helicopter would crash land on your house. If I had to choose between Pirate Fleet and Helicopter Tragedy, I would pick Helicopter Tragedy every time. Before I reveal the absolute worst Spyro level of all time, there are a few other levels that I did want to include, but couldn't squeeze in for various reasons, like trying to get a sleeping bag back into the sack that it lives in. These are levels that I couldn't really justify putting in place of other levels, or things I wanted to include that aren't really in the spirit of the top 10. You'll see what I mean when I start talking about it. Here are some honourable mentions. Spyro Fusion. Just all of it. The whole thing. The levels in Spyro Fusion are all so shit that I couldn't individually separate them, and I also don't think it's right to include every single level and have them all tie and share a spot on the list. That feels like cheating. Besides, I think it's fairly generous of me that I'm even calling them levels to begin with. These shitstains don't even deserve that. Spyro Fusion is a collection of crappy minigames that make the minigames in Dragon Shores look like Game of the Year material. And while it is one of the worst games I've ever seen, as per the rules of the top 10 that I didn't establish but probably should have established, I can't let the entirety of Spyro Fusion have a slot in the list. Spyro Shadow Legacy. The whole thing again. And I'm including it as an honourable mention for the same reason as Fusion. Spyro Shadow Legacy is, in my humble opinion, the worst thing to come out of this series. As a game, it is boring, it is confused, it is soulless, and it is a disgrace. All of its levels are practically identical in terms of gameplay, they just look slightly different. And like with Fusion, I cannot separate Shadow Legacy's levels. They're all just as bad as each other, and I feel like I can't let the whole game take the number one spot. But even though it's not officially appearing on the list, I ask you to know this. Spyro Shadow Legacy is fucking horrendous. It is the worst game in this series, and I will never, ever forget how bad it is. Robotica Farms from Spyro 2 Gateway to Glimmer. Objectively, this level isn't bad. There's nothing wrong with it at all, actually. It's just that I, personally, cannot fucking stand it. I hate Robotica Farms. I hate playing it, I hate the theme, I hate the way it looks, I hate the way it's structured, I hate the little story of it with the robot wasps, I hate it to a point I can't justify. And every time I get to it when I play Spyro 2, I throw my head back in frustration. This level makes me genuinely furious to an unreasonable degree. It concerns me how much I hate this level. I don't know why I hate it with such burning passion, but I do. Fuck Robotica Farms. And here we finally are. The level with the dishonour of being crowned the absolute worst level in the Spyro series is Convexity. Convexity is the final level in The Legend of Spyro A New Beginning, and it is nothing. Convexity is the level with absolutely no substance whatsoever. The Legend of Spyro can have pretty dire and repetitive gameplay at the best of times, but at least when it happens, you get to do something. In fact, every other level in the whole series, including Fusion and Shadow Legacy, actually let you do something that can be likened to gameplay with substance. Convexity does not offer that. All this level is a couple of minutes of offensively basic jumps over a gloomy soulless void, culminating in a final boss against Cinder, an opponent you can tear to shreds in mere seconds. It's an absolute joke of a level. The best part of the level is after you beat Cinder and the game ends, because that means it's over. If the best part of a level is a cutscene that comes after the level is completed, you've got a shit level on your hands. Some might not even consider this a level at all, and I get what you mean. The sheer nothingness on display here should disqualify Convexity from being considered a level. But what you probably mean is that you could consider it a boss stage tacked onto the end of Concurrent Skies. And you could do that, but it's not like that redeems Convexity. First of all, Concurrent Skies is not a good level. It's more of the same enemies and combat that A New Beginning bombards you with from the very first level. The only fun thing about Concurrent Skies is that it happened to be the level where I fucked around with the overpowered Earth Breath. Second of all, the game itself considers Concurrent Skies and Convexity to be two separate levels. So, if A New Beginning wants to hold Convexity aloft and say, this is the level the game ends with, so be it. I'm not going to argue with the source material. Not even the most hardcore Spyro fans can deny that Convexity is a steaming pile of hot garbage. It's a level emptier than Cloud 9, more repetitive than Time Machine Lab and Fairy Library, more forgettable than Dark Mine, weaker a climax than Gnasty's Loot, Dragon Shores and Super Bonus Round, and it doesn't even have the heart to flood itself with shitty combat like Burned Lands and Pirate Fleet. I can't think of any level more fitting to be the worst than Convexity. And there we have it, the top 10 worst Spyro levels. It was honestly hard to go through the whole series and pick out levels that I think are the absolute worst, because as much as I love to talk shit about it, I do love Spyro. I think. There is a pretty high likelihood that I will disagree with this list within hours of publishing it, but as I'm writing this, I'm happy with the result. Spyro has thrown a lot of shit my way, but these 10 levels are the shittiest. Time to flush!